for this morning's UUCD Forums. Let me introduce our esteemed speaker today, friend and fellow gardener. Kathy Hermes is employed by Lutheran Social Service as a program coordinator in youth and family services. They staff a free teen health center with focus on HIV testing outreach and also coordinate Together for Youth, the focus of what we're going to be talking about today, a social support group for LGBTQIA2S+ youth between the ages of 14 and 20. Prior to being a youth worker, Kathy taught high school life science for 19 years. We're so grateful to have you join us this morning, Kathy. The floor is yours, and everyone's in for a real treat today.
Thank you, Brett. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. I'm your average non-binary trans elder from the East Hillside, and as Brett mentioned, I do garden in the Chester Creek Garden, along with Brett and a whole bunch of other good folks. First of all, I wanted to start it out with a little bit of gratitude for the Woven Basket offering this time around, and for the Woven Basket offering pre-pandemic. I was at your building before the pandemic started changing our lives, doing this presentation, and I want to thank you for your generous offering that time. When we were running Together for Youth at that time, it was in person, of course, and we used your donations to help support making sure that the kids who come to the meetings have some snacks, because it's a late afternoon weekly meeting and they're often very hungry when they get to us, a lot of them coming from school. So thank you for keeping us banked in such a way that we could keep getting snacks for those normal, beautiful young people who come to us. And then the pandemic happened, and we could no longer meet in person. We still are not meeting in person. We had to shift to online. We did that immediately. Our first online meeting was in April, but already isolated young people became more isolated because of that shift to being online. And so to try to break that isolation, we got involved in creating care packages for the young people involved with Together for Youth. We did 4. We're getting ready to do round 5 at this time. Round 1 was kind of an end of school year care package. Round 2 was the Pride edition. And those gift cards that you see there, you all did that. There's 40 $25 gift cards to Super One. Julie Morgan was kind of the ringleader behind this. Julie collected gift cards. She made a couple of masked visits to my front door to drop off gift cards. And you all got us very, very close to the 40 we needed. I think I only had to buy a couple to get us up to the 40. And so we packed those along with all kinds of other things into those care packages. And I know, at least from a few anecdotes, that food security was becoming an issue for some of those families at that point in the summer, and they were very grateful to get that $25 gift card. So that's some hundreds of dollars. So thanks for that generosity from you all. And then now we're on the verge, as I mentioned, of pulling together a 5th round of care packages. So any donations that may come through your Woven Basket this time may help us fill those up, or we are going to try some outdoor meetings as soon as the weather consistently warms for us. And that means we're going to have to get snacks that are all individually packaged for COVID precautions, and it'll be a little more expensive than our usual snack buying. So it might be that some of your Woven Basket donations this time will help us with those individually packaged snacks that we'll get for the kids who will hopefully emerge from their bedrooms and come see us for real in a matter of weeks. So thank you very much. That was a lot of generosity. A couple of acknowledgements about you, and then acknowledgements about queer youth and adults for that matter, before I launch into the content. I know that some of you are very well versed on what I'm sharing, and most of it might be review. So just get your patience pants on and take in the review. But I also know that for some of you, there might be a lot of new information, especially around gender, and your head might be spinning pretty quickly. So just, yeah, keep your hearts and minds open and take in the information and use it considerately and responsively as you have the opportunities in the future. So I work with queer young people, but a lot of what I'm going to say is directly applicable to LGBTQ plus adults as well. So just kind of make that shift in your mind, as I might often be referencing youth. And I will reiterate what Brett said about questions. If you've got questions as we're going along, go ahead and chat box those, or if you're feeling mic ready, go ahead and pose the question. I will try to stop occasionally to see if people have questions after certain types of information. And I will linger afterwards in case you would want to chat with me one-on-one or in front of a smaller group of people. But yeah, don't hesitate to ask. If we get too far in the weeds on question and answer, I'll maybe rein that in, and then we'll try to redirect those to the end of the presentation. So a few kind of preamble proclamations before I make the PowerPoint move ahead. LGBTQ young people, in particular trans, non-binary, and two-spirit young people, are living in at least two different worlds. They're in a world where their very lives are being erased by legislators, state by state, now that the previous administration is no longer passing things on a broad scale federal level. You know you're from a marginalized population if people are talking about your very identity without even asking you, and in fact erasing you from many benefits that other people receive. And so that dynamic is very front and center right now, erasure of a whole group of people. Young people, some are very aware of that, and it adds to their load of burdens. But a lot of the young people that we work with, at least, are looking at other things on their devices, and they're not necessarily tuned in to that kind of news. But whether they're aware of it or not, it is impacting their lives. In particular, right now, all those bills going through individual state legislatures about trans athletes, very, very troubling. At the same time, there are more fearless, open-hearted, loving people like you all who are ready and willing to celebrate the lives of queer young people. And so that's kind of a crazy difference to navigate. Part of the world wants to erase you, and part of the world wants to celebrate you and lift you up. But that's what it's like. It's this really split palette of experience for LGBTQ youth and adults too. It's also a multi-layered world, especially related to safety. There are some very safe spaces. There are kind of safe spaces, and there are really dangerous spaces. And we as queer people, if we're out and about in our community, are probably encountering all of those kinds of spaces in one day. As we cross thresholds, literally cross thresholds of doorways of buildings, we're shifting from one kind of level of safety to the next. So that's really important to be mindful of too, that safety guaranteed in one space may be totally lost by simply walking out of that room, or maybe totally lost as a different person enters that room. Little bit of direct action opportunities before we get lost in the content. I want to make sure I touch on this in case we don't get that far. I could keep going for several hours with this slide deck that we've got here. So some direct actions that you can take to support Together for Youth kind of young people and adults too, is to do the pronoun thing. If you're not familiar with that, there'll be some more about that coming up here, but learn about it and model it. Do the bathroom thing. Make sure that there's gender neutral bathrooms available, not only in places of worship, but in places where you work, in public spaces. Ask that question of the people who control spaces where bathrooms are. Bank for young LGBTQ people, especially trans, non-binary, two-spirit people who may really struggle with basic banking activities because their true name does not match their dead name that's on their cards. So sometimes you can help simply make some monetary transaction take place by problem solving with those people. Um, do your best to make spaces safe. There's ways that you can make spaces small and large safe by dropping some clues, and we'll touch on some of those clues. And I know that you have some of those clues in your space of worship. There's evidence, I think, even before you walk in the door, that your space is very likely to be safe for LGBTQ people. And then I'm going to add hiring young LGBTQ people, especially trans, non-binary, two-spirit, the ability to land jobs, to hold jobs, to accumulate wealth for young LGBTQ people, non-binary, trans, two-spirit in particular, is really challenging. So if you are in a position where you employ people, seek out ways to identify, make your space, identify LGBTQ young people, make your space safe for them, and employ them. There's so much financial insecurity amongst the LGBTQ community, especially younger people. So with that, oh, actually, I'm going to say a few. Those were like direct action items, and I'll say a few indirect action items for you. Support the families of LGBTQ plus young people. Crush the binary supremacies wherever you see them, especially the one that centers around gender expression, that centers around masculinity and femininity, those made up codes of conduct we have, those that give us expectations for how women and girls and boys and men are supposed to behave. That is really problematic. So bust that up whenever you can. Change the minds of your direct circles, your family, friends, colleagues, congregation members. If you're hearing people make comments that may be misinformed or downright transphobic or homophobic, find a way to stop that flow of information and call people in. See if you can get a conversation, a positive conversation going about that. And then, yeah, whenever you get the chance to challenge systems, like changing the way data is collected or changing the way, for example, that insurance is applied to people, do that. Ask questions of the power holders who control those types of entities. Chip away at breaking down the systems that are not valuing all people, LGBTQ youth in particular. So with that, I will launch into bit of the PowerPoint content. So we've asked LGBTQ plus young people in our Together for Youth group, in the Gender and Sexuality Alliances in area schools and in other occasions, we asked them what they want and need from their teachers, administrators, school staff in general. And the list comes out being very similar every time. And this is always, always number one. So take note of this and do what you can to honor this, whether it's school settings or not. So our LGBTQ plus students want us to use their true pronouns. And that might take some practice. So get on with some practice and utilize different pronouns. For us, they don't want us to argue with them about the singularity of they and them. Just don't do it. Go tell a tree about it, or tell your cat, or tell your neighbor if they're an understanding neighbor, but don't have that dialogue with a young person as you're standing there with them and they've just shared their pronouns with you as they, them. Just stay away from arguing. Our LGBTQ plus students want us to teach them LGBTQ plus history. We have a rich history here in the Duluth Superior area, and our young people know very little about it. We do our best to make that information accessible, but there's sadly very limited knowledge of the people who came before them as current LGBTQ community members. And same for the state of Minnesota. We have a pretty rich LGBTQ plus history here in Minnesota. So look for those opportunities to lift that up. And our young people want us to teach them comprehensive sex education. That's true for pretty much all young people in the United States of America. We're pretty dismal at sex education in general, especially comprehensive sex education. And then finally, our young people want us to let go of cis normativity and heteronormativity. It's awesome that they know words like that. Cis normativity, presuming that all people are cisgender and that cisgender people are superior to non-cisgender people, and heteronormativity, the notion that heterosexuality is that all people are heterosexual and that is the normal way to be, and to deviate from that is to be mentally ill or whatever other notions are held about people who are not heterosexual.
Hey, Kathy, this is Kathy Helter quick. I
Yep.
don't think everybody knows what cisgender means, so maybe just a quick description of what cisgender is.
Okay, sure. I'll do a quickie and then we'll see that word coming up in some vocab. Cisgender is about your gender identity, and it is taking into account your anatomy and therefore the sex you were assigned at birth based at what the doctors observed when you popped out into the world. It also takes into account your brain's informing of you about your gender, utilizing the cues that society offers to us. And I'm going to proclaim them to be pretty flawed cues because we just made them up, those rules about masculinity and femininity. And then finally, our gender expression, how we choose to present ourselves to the greater world. I'll have to qualify if it's safe to do so. It is not safe for many people to authentically express their gender identity. So if you are a person who has female anatomy and your brain has informed you for the long run when you were a little kid that you're a girl, and now your brain is continuing to inform you that you're a woman, and you, for the most part, express in a feminine way based on those codes of femininity we're so well versed in, then the word cisgender would apply to you. To get all biological, biochemical about it, cis is a word used in science to mean to be on the same side or in alignment with, like the cis face of the Golgi apparatus, for those of you who know what I'm saying, or the cis atom in a big, gigantic organic molecule, just referring to structures that are on the same side as something else. So to be in alignment. If you are a person with a female anatomy, but your brain has been telling you since you were a little kid that, you know, you're actually a boy, and now that you're an adult, it's telling you you're actually a man, and you're feeling really compelled to express in a masculine way, then the word transgender would apply to you. You have female body parts, however, your brain is telling you that you are a man. And in this case, you may not express authentically. You may not express in a masculine way if it's not safe in the area where you live. And I would suggest that up here in northeastern Minnesota or the upper Midwest, I'll broaden it and say it's generally not safe to fully authentically express as a transgender person. Sad to say, given that it's 2021. So thanks for the cue there, Kathy. I hope I clarified more than confused with that description. And we'll hit those words again if we get farther along in the presentation where there's some terminology that comes up. But if we're going to be binary about things, I would guess most of you in this presentation are cisgender people. If you look at transgender identity as a binary concept, there would be two choices: you're cisgender or transgender. And so about 98% of you would be cisgender and about 2% of you would be transgender. But I always want to crush that binary because it keeps me invisible. I'm non-binary trans. I'm not a woman. I'm not a man. I am genderqueer. And so I want to break that down even further, which is maybe going to just cause some confusion. But hold on, we'll maybe clarify better for you what non-binary identities are, whether it's gender-wise, sexual identity-wise, or expression-wise. And you know what? most of you are non-binary, and that's natural and normal and beautiful. You're just not inclined to see that or embrace that because we have banked heavily on that binary of masculinity and femininity having to match up to men and boys and girls and women, which doesn't leave room for non-binary folks. Okay, any other questions relative to that? We'll pound on that a little bit more, that gender stuff. So maybe we'll hit some more clarifying spots for you as we go along. I'm going to call upon social psychologists who proclaim the basic needs for human beings, all human beings, regardless of your identity. And then I'll slip the queer lens over it, since that's what we're here for today. So first of all of us need to feel significant in such a way that our community, our society makes sure that there's food, shelter, education, and healthcare for us. Within the queer community, we need to feel significant within schools, places of worships like your place, in workplaces, in the greater community. That adds some challenges. One really, really important way to offer up a feeling of significance is to use true names and pronouns. I'm going to qualify when it's safe. So it may be safe within the walls of your building there, but it may not be safe out in the parking lot where there's a mix of people that you may not necessarily identify as being the safe people who are just in the building with you. Second, it's important for us all to belong in our families, biological or families of origin, of course, but in the queer community, it's really important to acknowledge chosen families because there's so many LGBTQ people, trans, two-spirit, non-binary people in particular, who are separated from their families, downright family rejection, or you run away from your family because you're afraid of the potential rejection that may be coming down the pike. 40% of the youth who are identified as homeless, I'll say up to 40% of the youth who are identified as homeless, that's up to age 24, identify as LGBTQ+, whereas probably about 8 to 10% of those young people are of the general population are LGBTQ. That's an indication of a high degree of separation from family for LGBTQ young people and adults too. So be mindful of chosen family. Don't judge chosen family because they get us through, and welcome them. And I'm guessing that you welcome chosen family fully in your congregation, but help other places see and welcome chosen families. Invitations extended to family picnics and all kinds of other things that families get invited to should include an invitation to chosen families too. It's so important to make an individual feel as though they belong if their family also is made to feel as though they belong too. The issue of safety, the basics, emotionally, physically, psychologically, spiritually, but I'm going to emphasize the increased danger of safety in this time of erasure, where people deny that certain identities don't even exist, that they are indicative of mental unwellness. So safety is so, so, so important. It is, I'll just anecdotally share that I've communicated with LGBTQ adults in the community, not young people yet, but LGBTQ adults who are arming themselves, who never ever thought that they would be gun owners, arming themselves and going in for training because they feel so afraid at this particular point in our collective history. That's very, very concerning, but understandable. An indication of the long-standing need to be mindful of safety for LGBTQ people, in this case, trans people in particular. This is on November 20th, a few years ago, corner of Lake and Superior, where people gathered to, number one, proclaim with signs and with voices that trans people do exist and they're normal and beautiful, and we should grieve when we lose trans people. And the numbers of trans people losing their lives to hate crimes is not plateauing. It is climbing yet. This is an altar I made for All Souls Night a couple of years ago. These are trans people from the United States who we lost that we know of. Have to make sure that we claim it that way. And I think there were 26, if I remembered. Might be a little hard to pick up on their full identities, but it's almost all women. They're all trans people. They're almost all women, and almost all of them are women of color. So 3 dangerous identity intersections there that lead to the high chance for hate crime being perpetrated against them. Trans identity, woman identity, and person of color identity. I made a similar altar this year for Trans Day of Remembrance. It was in Penny Perry's frame shop front window, and it was up to 34. So it was 26 in this photo, and I had to create 34 of them. And certainly there were more that just were never reported. So we really, really need to be heads up about the safety of our trans, non-binary, two-spirit friends, family, community members. It is clearly not safe. And a series of headlines and kind of the point to be made here is that violence against trans people starts at a very young age. Most of these are relative to school-aged kids, most of them relative to teenagers. That's a heavy burden to start carrying at such a young age, and likely have to carry that throughout their adult life. Give you a little bit more about school experience. This is Minnesota results. It's the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network school survey results from 2017. They do this one every 3 years, I believe. I looked at the most recent results, and what I'm going to show you here does not differ very much from the more recent results. They stay very close to the same, or they get a little bit worse in terms of impinging on the safety of our young people. So these are young people reporting about their school experiences. If they're not school attached, they're not responding to this particular survey. So it's school related, which is even more striking. We had enough kids in Minnesota answer this national survey that they did tease out results just for our Minnesota kids. So here's what some of our Minnesota kids have said. 9 in 10 hear the word gay used in a negative way. That's still happening. A lot of times they hear it from adults, the adults who should have their backs and not be committing microaggressions against them. They also hear the phrase no homo in a very similar way too. 8 in 10 of our Minnesota young people hear negative remarks about how someone expresses their gender. We'll hit on that a little bit more. 6 in 10 regularly hear negative remarks about trans people in particular. 14% regularly hear school staff making homophobic remarks, and 32% hear school staff making negative remarks about someone's gender. So school staff should not be sitting in this statistics pool. They should be sitting on the positive side of the ledger, and they should be supporting our kids. But they're harming, many of our school staff members are harming our kids still in 2021. So I'm going to back up to that 8 in 10 regularly hear negative remarks about how someone expresses their gender, and use this image. There's Paige and Peter, twins. Look what mom did in the quintessential mom way of upholding the binary supremacy of gender expression. Paige in pink, Peter in blue. And Paige was not a little pinky. Paige was a little goth baby. Paige grew up and favored goth outfits, grew up for most of her schooling in Sartell, a little town just north of St. Cloud. And it got rugged for Paige in school. She was a goth kid, so she did the all black stuff, and she was attracted to other girls, so she was lesbian identified. And when the word got out, the kids were merciless. And even her brother Peter, little Peter right there, would play a part in adding to the bullying. But she endured and got I think up to 10th or 11th grade, and was dating a girl, but then that girl she was dating started to have realizations about her gender identity, and she realized she was a boy, and so she started socially transitioning and presenting as a boy in school. And then Paige became confused about her lesbian status, like, how could I be a lesbian if I like this boy? And I really do still like this this boy. So was confused about that, but then took another layer of bullying because of her relationship with this weird kid who shifted from girl to boy somehow in their little school in Sartell. And so things got so bad for Paige that she dropped out of school and finished online, which is still a fairly common occurrence for a lot of our LGBTQ youth. Can't endure going to school another day and drop out. Some of them never finish. Some of them get GEDs the old style way, and many of them take a shot at online schooling. And I'll share that I was just working with Solon Springs parent whose child was struggling so much at Solon Springs School that the child engaged in an infraction that they knew would get them kicked out of school. That was their way to try to not be in school, is they intentionally broke a rule and hoped that the outcome would be that they would be removed from the school. And I'm not sure how that has resolved itself at this point, but that's sad that a young person would have to plot in that manner to try to get emotional, psychological safety for themselves. I'll give you the good news part. Paige persisted, went to school at St. Cloud State, got her degree, motored up here to Duluth, got her master's up here, became a social worker, and so has been interned with Together for Youth, worked with Lutheran Social Service, works with PAVSA, and has been supporting marginalized young people as an adult. So Paige made it to the point where she could support other young people coming up. But it was hard. It was really hard. And she's still goth, that she stayed true to herself in that way. She has a partner. They have 2 children, and here's the first one that came down the pike. That's Peyton, and Paige and her partner are trying to do their very best to not impose gender, the binary gender expectations on their children. They have a second child named Logan. So there's Peyton's feelings about the gender binary. Like, yeah, gender binary is kind of like a dirty diaper. We need to get rid of it. And a little bit more on schools experiences for our kids, and then I'll stop and see if any of you have questions about this. This is kind of a grim run of information. So we'll take a little turn after this set here. So this is information about victimization and discrimination happening in our schools. Again, it's not stuff that happened to these kids out in the community. This is stuff that has happened to our kids in our schools. 70% of the LGBTQ kids who took the survey said they were harassed or assaulted in their schools. 53% who were harassed or assaulted never bothered to report it. 34% who did report say that it resulted in effective responses, but that means 66% had not effective responses. That issue of more than half of the kids not even wanting to report assaults is very problematic, but it's understandable when we saw that earlier statistic about how many staff members use transphobic and homophobic remarks. Why set yourself up for double victimization if you pick the wrong staff member to go report to? 3/4 of the Minnesota reporting kids said they were deliberately excluded, had rumors or lies told about them, they're sexually harassed, they're cyberbullied, or they have their personal property damaged or stolen. That's a lot of our LGBTQ kids having to endure really unpleasant conditions. And then the issue of 1/4 of the students who reported say they were prevented from using bathrooms, also locker rooms, dressing rooms that align with their gender. That continues to be a problem. I'm gonna thumbs up Denfeld for piloting gender neutral bathrooms here in the Duluth School District, in spite of some of the adults being really afraid of what might happen if they had a couple more gender neutral bathrooms in their building. Their fears were not realized, and things actually worked quite smoothly. And a lot of people were appreciative of those gender neutral bathrooms that were made available at Denfeld High School. And now Ordine East and Lincoln Park are also working on it or have already established gender neutral bathrooms. So that's an important one. So help people out with that. Okay, so on the presumed nothing takeaway. I'll say three things about not making presumptions. First one, presume nothing about someone's gender identity if you know something about their sexual identity, and vice versa. Gender identity and sexual identity are two fully separate human characteristics. One does not define the other. So you might be a cisgender person, like I had described earlier, like probably most of you listening in, and you could be gay or straight or bisexual or pansexual or omnisexual or asexual or demisexual or any of a number of other sexual identities. Or you could be a transgender person, like me. I'm non-binary trans, and you could be gay or straight or bisexual or pansexual or demisexual or omnisexual or asexual or any of a number of other sexual identities. So knowing one does not necessarily inform you about the other in a person. Second, I'm going to say, and I say this coming from my work with young people, make no presumptions about what young people or adults for that matter know about sex education, harm reduction, healthy relationships. We got a lot of gaps there, not just for young people, but for adults too. A statistic that just isn't moving much, it indicates that young lesbian identified girls get pregnant 2 to 3 times more frequently than their straight counterparts. Part of, I mean, there's a number of causes behind that, but one of them is when adults find out that someone's a lesbian, they figure, well, we don't have to tell this kid about condoms. Oh, so wrong. So wrong about that. So yeah, make no presumptions. I just tell everybody everything. Everybody should get comprehensive sex education. That's harm reduction. That's going to change lives positively if we do that. And then here's the new part that I'm going to try this slide out on you. I'm using a response that came through a health related survey that was conducted recently here in northeastern Minnesota. I'm not going to name it because it hasn't gone public yet. So you're getting a little sneak peek and a little piece of the results from this particular health related survey. And I was on their data team, and I did work with them on trying to ask a few questions about gender in such a way that they haven't in the past, and to do it considerately for trans, non-binary, two-spirit people who may potentially be responding to this survey. And so I'm going to say, make no presumptions about what the people around you know or think about gender and sexuality. Because there's a lot of binary supremacy alive and well in northeastern Minnesota around gender and sexual identity. And it comes out in this particular survey question. And I think I hear people all the time who are just totally astonished at how their very, very good friend is totally transphobic, or that Auntie Carol is totally homophobic, and they didn't realize it till some little incident came up. So yeah, be mindful about how not everybody's on the same page as you. And I'm pigeonholing you as being on a pretty darn liberal page relative to gender and sexual identity and regarding queer people well. So the question that's going to get highlighted here is a question about gender, and people were just asked, what is your gender? And a little slate of responses was given. It's not the best slate yet, but it's better than it used to be. But a good thing that they did at the bottom, they let people describe their gender identity or self-identify, which if you have control of forms and you must know people's genders or sexual identities or sexes, always give people the option to self-identify. If not exclusively, do it that way. And if you don't know, don't need to know, don't ask about it, because you're gonna be good to them anyhow, right? But if you're running into situations where you gotta ask people about their gender identity, this particular survey did a better job than they've done in the past. So I'm going to share with you the responses, and this is kind of just random people in northeastern Minnesota who took the time to answer the survey. So it's probably a fairly broad array of demographics. So kind of maybe your average northeastern Minnesotan responding to the survey. So The first category of people who offered their response, I color coded it. The yellow ones that pop up are people who don't know what the heck this question meant. And think about people in your life who would not know quite how to answer this question. Or maybe it's you. You're not quite sure how to answer this question. So here's people who didn't get this question. Here's how they answered. Oh, I'm a widow. My husband died last year. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not familiar with these terms. I'm 84 years old. I'm an 89-year-old widower. We're a married couple. Mother, grandmother, great grandmother. I'm an old bat. I'm a tech. This question is too confusing. I'm a trans species. What's cisgender? I thought it was LGBTR. I thought I was informed. Sorry. This is a weird question. So how many people do you know who would respond in a similar way to a question asking them to describe their gender identity? And how many of you would maybe answer with one of these answers? And look at the great opportunity to help people understand better if you realize someone might respond in this way to this question. Then we had the people who did get it, who were probably really happy to see this opportunity to indicate their gender. So someone said they were agender. F to M stands for female to male transgender, woman, born woman, gender nonconforming, man, queer, trans woman, female trans woman, white trans female. So these people understood it. They answered in the expected way using the expected terminology. So how many of you would have known how to answer this and would have answered in this way? Or how many of the people do you associate with out there in your big old world would have been able to answer in an accurate way? And then we get, this is a lot of the people out there so confused about sex and gender identity, like just can't get those separated in their minds correctly. And it's totally not their fault because on all kinds of forms and identification cards and stuff, we get it wrong in a big way. Like Minnesota's license thing where you can put X, that got messed up. Because if you're going accurately, an X would indicate you're intersex. And at least I know a lot of people who are happy to put the X on there identify as genderqueer or non-binary gender-wise. So yeah, Minnesota Department of Transportation missed an opportunity to get it right. So here's people confused about this gender identity question and oftentimes mixing it up with sex. So they say they're homosexual, bisexual, I'm gay, I'm a gay man, I'm heterosexual, I'm straight, I'm a super stud, the sex I was born with. And then here's the category of people, the binary supremacists, who are so powerful and privileged that they can make a claim on what amount of choices there are. And I'm wondering how many people you know are binary supremacists and who would answer this question in the same way. And I'm wondering if any of you might have the impulse to answer this question in this way. So these are people denying that non-binary people like me exist. Non-binary people like a lot of people out there. So when they were asked about gender identity, they say, you can't change who you are. Come on, man, there's only two. Genesis 1:27, there's only two. God created only men and women. I'm a woman, naturally, males and females. Only two genders exist, only two are needed, only two possible answers. And I can't see that one with my share bar. Silly question. There is only two. There are only two genders. There are only two genders scientifically by DNA. There are only two sexes. There is only two genders, two people. So these are binary supremacists who are denying the very existence of non-binary people, all kinds of normal, beautiful, non-binarily identified people. Here's where we got a lot of work to do. These binary supremacists are supported by those old notions about masculinity and femininity that are so deeply embedded in our psyches. So I often recommend that people take in the documentary, The Mask You Live In, about hypermasculinity or misrepresentation about hyperfemininity. It comes from the Representation Project. You might be able to stream those on Netflix. At one time you could. And maybe going back to Steve's question about wrapping your head around this stuff, these documentaries aren't necessarily going to help you with all the terminology relative to gender and sexual identity, but these documentaries are going to help you get some stable ground from which to break down the supremacies around masculinity and femininity, and open the door for non-binary identities to be recognized and lifted up. And then one of my favorites here, the post-labeling futurist who says, call me what you will, I'm a human first, I'm all about that. A couple of privacy specialists, 50 and 51, none of your business, and then finally, someone who really appreciated this. Thanks for asking this question. So questions or comments around this kind of graphic representation of the way people understand gender? Because look at all the pink. It's not half, but boy, there's a lot of pink up there. That's the people denying the existence of other people. These are the people helping to push anti-trans legislation right now in state legislatures. These are the people who went after Target when they opened up their dressing rooms and bathrooms to people to use based on their self-identified gender. These are the people who have gender reveal parties when you can't know the gender of an infant yet. Those cues from society are not like an infant can't take that in. You can have a sex reveal party, but you can't have a gender reveal party. And I'll say an example of breaking this business about gender notions. I heard on NPR this morning, there was a piece about high-level gymnasts refusing to wear leotards and wearing unitards instead, the one-piece performance outfit with leggings on them. That's breaking this supremacy about femininity and masculinity expectations in sport in this example. So I'm going to do a time check here, about 10:41. Additional questions or comments?
I have put into the chat for folks a couple of links to a couple of things you might be interested out front, and Prism, and then also the Mask You Live In information as well. Okay, well, with that, I really want to thank Kathy for being with us here today, and we will leave the room open we're going to stop the recording and leave the